Hello and welcome to this very special first ever virtual edition of the Clore Social Leaders Now Breakfast series. These events are an opportunity for us to get involved in inspiring conversations with leaders and to help us to network and collaborate with others across the social sector. The aim is for this to be a space where we can speak openly and honestly about important topics, share our personal stories and listen and learn from each other. My name is Jo Campion and I'm a current participant of the Clore Social Experience Leader Programme, which means that I have had the absolute privilege of being supported through a global pandemic, not only by the lovely team at Clore Social, but also by my brilliant fellow participants on the course. And what a time it has been to be learning about yourself, warts and all, and grapple with the many leadership challenges that we are all facing, big and small. From leading remote teams in a crisis, to the fallout from the furlough scheme, to the economic crisis and the major redundancies and restructures that are happening across the sector. I'm also Deputy Director of Campaigning and Advocacy at the National Deaf Children's Society, where I run national campaigns with deaf children and their families. I have worked part-time and flexibly for the last 7 years. And last but not least, I am mother to 2 young children. I co-parent with a disabled partner. And I've recently returned to my paid work following a period of childcare related furlough. So the topic we're going to discuss today is one that is very close to my own heart, the impact of the pandemic on women, and one which I know many of us here today will have been exploring. Before I introduce our fantastic speaker this morning, a couple of practicalities. Please feel free to post on social media. But do check before sharing some personal stories, anything personal to anyone else. The Clore Social team, Yulia and Nadia, have joined us as panelists. Do message them directly if you have any queries or technical problems. You can write your questions on the chat section throughout the event, or if you will prefer, you'll be able to ask your questions using the raise hand function via video and audio once we are in the Q&A, which is going to be around about 9:30 onwards. So just raise your hand and then we can select you and you can put your video and audio on. So I'd like now to introduce Joeli Brearley, the founder of the charity and campaigning group Pregnant Then Screwed, which works to end the motherhood penalty and supports mothers who face discrimination. She started campaigning in 2015 after she was sacked by her employer the day after she informed them she was expecting her first child. She's a regular contributor on Radio 5 Live. She writes for The Telegraph and The Independent and has won various awards. Described by Elle magazine as fearsome and funny, she has been awarded by the 2019 Northern Power Women Agent of Change Award. She is an Observer 2018 New Radical and an Amnesty International Women's Human Rights Defender. Joeli's first book, Pregnant Then Screwed, The Truth About the Motherhood Penalty, is going to be published next year in March. And Pregnant Then Screwed are currently taking legal action against the government for indirect sex discrimination, and they are leading on landmark research into the experiences of pregnant women and mothers during COVID-19. So quite a speaker we've got with us today. Perhaps you could start by telling us a little bit about your personal leadership journey and how Pregnant Screwed came about.
Yeah, sure. Morning, everybody. To me, this actually feels really early. I'm not a morning person. Jo, you seem like a real morning person. I've had 2 coffees and a cup of tea to be able to speak this morning.
I've had too much coffee, that's all.
On coffee. I've only just finished shouting at my children, "Get your shoes on!" over and over again, and now I'm speaking to adults. So my leadership journey. So I had done lots of different careers and jobs and all sorts of weird and wonderful things before I started Pregnant Then Screwed. I sold advertising space for the Crack magazine in Newcastle, crack as in funny, for 2 years, which I think was a really good foundation for anything you're going to do, like really hardcore sales job with a bunch of crazy lunatics from a magazine. And then I worked in the music industry, and then I worked in the tech industry, and then I did events and worked in the arts. Did loads of different types of jobs. And I was actually working for a children's charity when I discovered that I was pregnant. I was running a big innovation project for them that I had designed and secured all the funding for. And I was 4 months pregnant when I told them. The pregnancy wasn't all planned. I mean, that's a completely different presentation, isn't it? But it meant that I hadn't, purposefully got pregnant in the middle of a contract that I was running for them. I told them that I was pregnant. I informed them by email. I planned everything for them. I had everything sorted. So I'd sent them an email. Look, I'm pregnant. I know that this will affect the end of my year-long contract, but I've got a plan. This is what we'll do. Let's discuss it. Give me a call. Let's discuss it tomorrow. And the next day they called me, and while I was brushing my teeth, I heard my phone ring and thought, I can't answer because, big frothing mouth of toothpaste. So I'll call them back. Listen to the answer phone message, and the answer phone message said, sorry to tell you that your contract is being pulled. Please hand everything over immediately. So I knew straight away what had happened. They got rid of me because I was pregnant. It was really obvious. Everything was going fine. Told them I was pregnant. Suddenly they didn't want me to work for them anymore. And I was terrified. I mean, utterly petrified. I was showing. I was living in a flat with my boyfriend. I didn't know how I was going to pay the rent. I didn't know where my next paycheck was going to come from, who was going to employ a visibly pregnant woman. And I was furious, utterly livid that somebody had done that to me. So I tried to get some legal advice. I actually really struggled, ended up getting a solicitor. The solicitor wrote the charity a letter to demand compensation. They just threw that in the bin and ignored it. And that whole process cost me £300. So when you have no idea where your next income is going to come from, it's terrifying, hemorrhaging that sort of money. And the next stage would be to take them to tribunal, which would, without a lawyer, would be incredibly different to do. And if I got a lawyer, you're looking at about £6,000 to £8,000 to take them to tribunal. I mean, who has that sort of money? I didn't. So as I was sort of thinking this through about taking legal action, I went for a routine hospital appointment, and they did a scan on me, and they said, your cervix has almost vanished. You could go into labour at any point. And if you go into labour, the baby will die. And so I was dealing with losing my job, suddenly was told my baby was probably going to die. I passed out cold on the floor, had to be scooped up, was rushed into surgery to have an operation on my cervix. They said that may not fix things, but whatever you do, don't get stressed. If you get stressed, that will bring on labour and your baby won't survive. And obviously that, that wasn't a choice I had the privilege of making at that point in time. But I did have the choice as to whether I took them to tribunal or not. And so I was left to decide between the health of my unborn child or the justice that I deserved. And because you only have 3 months to raise a tribunal claim from the point the discrimination occurs, I couldn't wait till my son was born. He was fine. He stayed put for the duration, thankfully, and then pick the case up at a later date. So I dropped the case. After I had him, I started attending parent groups, talking to other mums about what had happened to me, and discovered that far from mine being an isolated incident, actually stuff like this was happening all the time. And then it happened to 2 close friends of mine, one of whom I'd lived with all the way through university and beyond. She had trained as a stockbroker, bizarrely. So while I was going out getting really drunk and having a whale of a time while I lived with her, she was at home studying. She got pregnant and they kicked her out of a job. And that was it, her whole career over and done with. And so I just thought we needed to tell these stories because how did I not know this was a thing? And so I set up a website, a place for women to tell their stories anonymously, and it just grew from there. So when you say my leadership journey, everything has genuinely been, I mean, I hate the word organic, but there isn't really a better word. It's just, I've kind of felt my way through this, and it's all, the foundation of it has always been wanting to connect with other women that have had this experience, and that has stayed throughout the journey of Pregnant and Screwed. It's always been about the women that are having this experience and connecting with them and understanding what is happening on the ground. So we started off with a place, this hub for women to tell these stories, and then women were asking me for advice. What do I do? I need legal advice, and I wasn't a lawyer, so I thought, so I was signposting them to places, but that wasn't working. And then I met this fantastic lawyer called Danielle Ayres. We had a cup of tea in Manchester, and I said, would you help me set up a free legal advice line? And she said, to my amazement, yes. And that's still operating 5 years later and is really successful. And we support, now at the moment, we support about 300 to 400 women a month through that line. No, hold on, it's more than that. We support, 2 months ago, we supported 1,000 women in a month. It's just gone crackers because of COVID-19, which we'll come on to. And then set up a mentor program to support women taking employees to tribunal. And then we started campaigning and lobbying on issues that were affecting women. And then we set up Pregnant and Screwed in America, Spain and Sweden. And then we started doing events to bring everybody together. And it's very much volunteer-led. So we have 45 volunteers that work across the country who all have experience of pregnancy or maternity discrimination. And here we are.
And here we are. So what a journey to this point. And as you've already said, sort of probably went a bit crackers about a few months ago when the pandemic began. So how would you describe the impact of the pandemic on women? And maybe now would be a good time to show your little video that you've got that sort of brings us up to speed on the most recent events.
Yeah.
Can we play the video?
From this evening, I must give the British people a very simple instruction. You must stay at home.
Pregnant Then Screwed shows that 71% of women trying to return to work in the next 3 months cannot because of childcare.
A real concern for many people is childcare.
Women's jobs are genuinely at risk because of a lack of childcare.
Gonna make it hot, gonna make it till it drops, never gonna pick it up, gonna take it to the top, I'm gonna make it, never gonna break it, gonna make it, never gonna break it. Gonna take it, 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 gonna take it.
Channel 4 News has learned that a 28-year-old nurse who had tested positive for COVID-19 died here on Sunday.
And now the guidance needs to clearly state that all pregnant women, no matter what gestation, should not be working in patient-facing roles, and they must be at home on full pay.
It is overt pregnancy discrimination, pure and simple.
This discriminates against women on lower incomes in particular, penalises families with young children and exacerbates the gender pay gap.
For all sorts of reasons, people have up and downs and variation in their earnings, whether through maternity, ill health or others.
He correlated this to sick leave, which is frankly insulting.
Just to add my support to Pregnant Then Screwed and my good friend Olga Fitzroy, the campaigning they've been doing for maternity and paternity rights in this sector.
People are encouraged to go back to work. This can't happen because we've got no childcare. What advice would the Prime Minister give her?
Pregnant Then Screwed is threatening the Chancellor of the Exchequer with legal action.
We are very confident we're going to win.
This clear discrimination in this government policy.
Concerns about the impact of local action on childcare arrangements. So today I'm able to announce a new exemption for looking after children.
We do not defend the rights of these women right now, then when are we going to?
Wow, great video. What an inspiring video, and what a journey you've been on in the last couple of months. What do you then, beyond the childcare issues, I mean, what do you think are the biggest concerns going forward from this point for women in this global pandemic?
Well, the key issues are childcare. I mean, they really are. Childcare is a massive issue, but also, the generational rollback of maternal employment that we're currently witnessing is utterly terrifying. And the reason we're seeing this rollback is because of childcare. It goes back to an issue that we experienced over the 4 months of lockdown. So if we just go back a step, what happened during lockdown obviously was all the kids were at home, the schools were closed, the nurseries were closed, the kids were driving us all crackers, and women were doing the majority of the care work and the domestic labour, which isn't a new thing. We always do the majority of the care work and the domestic labour. We do more than double the care work. We do 60% of the domestic labour. So this has always been a problem. But when the kids are at home, it's an even bigger problem. And so the research was showing that for every 1 hour of uninterrupted work that women were doing, men had 3 hours of uninterrupted work. Women were having to reduce their paid work by 2 hours, and they were increasing their unpaid work by 2 hours, whereas that just didn't happen for men. And so this inevitably had an impact, firstly, on our earnings. So we saw, even in April, the Institute of Fiscal Studies showed that women were 47% more likely to either have been pushed out of their jobs or have quit already by that point because of these childcare issues. They were 14% more likely to be furloughed, because you could ask to be furloughed if you had childcare issues. Now we're at a point where 40% of employers are making redundancies, and the top reasons that because they've got to score people when they're figuring out who to make redundant, the top priorities are standard of work and attendance to work. Now, of course, women with kids, the standard of work has deteriorated and their attendance has not been great because they've got their kids at home. So through no fault of their own, they're scoring low and they're being pushed out of their jobs at a rate of knots. So we did some research with 20,000 mums responded to our survey, which shows how desperate people are to have their voice heard, and they just weren't being heard. And that showed that 15% of mums say they either have been made redundant or expect to be made redundant, and that 46% say childcare is the reason that they are being made redundant. So it's a problem that wasn't addressed at all during lockdown. It was ignored. I mean, we were saying this earlier, that it was just pretend, let's sweep it under the carpet. That's not happening. All this unpaid labour, let's be shh. If we don't mention it, then nobody will notice. And actually, what we're seeing now, of course, is that it's mothers being pushed out of their job. And why this is so terrifying, I mean, it's because, I mean, it took us 15 years to improve maternal employment by 12%. You know, it's really difficult, 25 years. It's really difficult to get mothers into work because we need these structures and systems around us in order for us to be enabled to work. We need flexible working. We need childcare that really works and that is cost effective. We need partners who help us reduce the domestic labour and all the unpaid work that we're doing. You need lots of things to work in order for mothers to be able to have jobs. And so now that so many mothers are out of work, it's much harder for them to get back into work than it is any other types of employees.
So what can we do to support this cause? I mean, what can we do moving forward to sort of change this?
Yeah, I mean, we do, I'm afraid to say that we do seem to have a government that doesn't really, they're not really interested in maternal employment. This has been raised. It's not that they don't know that all these problems exist. It's been raised repeatedly in Parliament, and it's been swept under the carpet. So the big problem we're going to have in the future is that childcare is in a mess. Our childcare structure, I mean, it was in a mess before the pandemic. Nurseries were closing, particularly in deprived areas. So many nurseries were closing because the funding from the government doesn't cover the cost to run those places. So you talk about 30 hours free for 3-year-olds. It's not free, and it's massively under subsidized. The same for 2 and 3-year-olds. It's under subsidized by about 32% per place. So this has caused massive financial holes for nurseries and has caused great problems to the childcare sector. So when you have this pandemic and we all go into recession and money is a massive issue, the childcare sector didn't have money in their coffers to bail them out of the problem. So it's estimated by the Institute of Fiscal Studies that about a quarter of nurseries they're in unbelievable financial mess, and they will end up closing their doors unless the government does something really soon. If you don't have childcare, parents can't work. You can't work unless somebody's looking after your child, can you? You've got, it's not, you can't work with a child. I think we all know that. So unless they do something about the childcare sector, we're in chaos. The other thing that needs to happen is the redundancy protections for pregnant women and for women who've returned from maternity leave are really lacking. So the current law is that when you are on maternity leave, you have enhanced protection. What enhanced protection means is that if you are made redundant and another job exists that's your skill level, you must be offered that job before anybody else in the organisation. That only exists when you're on maternity leave. It doesn't exist when you're pregnant, doesn't exist when you return. That means that it's really easy now for bosses to get rid of pregnant women, and they think pregnant women are a burden to business. We know that. All of the research shows that pregnant women are going to be the first to be pushed out. Maria Miller, a Conservative MP, has brought this bill to Parliament. Again, she's had to do it before and it hasn't got through for various reasons, to enhance those protections so they work for pregnant women returning from maternity leave, but also so that they're even more protected, and businesses can only get rid of those women if the business effectively is closing, so in quite extreme circumstances. Obviously, this bill has got planned for a second reading on the 8th of October, I think, 14th of October, one of them. And at the moment, it hasn't got ministerial support. The ministers are not supporting it. So what everybody can do is write to their MP and say, support Maria Miller's pregnancy and maternity redundancy protection bill, because the more noise we can make about that bill, the more likely it is to pass. Again, we're looking at the minute at a campaign around childcare, so obviously getting support around that is also really, really useful.
Can you tell me a little bit more about your views on flexible working? Before we were talking, and you said that you had some quite controversial opinions on that, and I'd be interested to hear them.
I mean, they're not that controversial. I've made it sound really exciting, haven't I, and tantalising. So my thing, right, is the motherhood penalty. That's what Pregnant and Screwed is really about. It's about the fact that mothers suffer economically because they are mothers. So the structures and systems do not work for mothers in the workplace. When women return to work from maternity leave, 2/3 of them ask for some form of flexible working. The majority ask for part-time working. 1/3 are rejected. So that forces them out of the workplace straight away, because you need flexible working when you're returning to work in order to be able to balance your professional and personal obligations. So the 1/3 that are rejected, they have to leave the workforce, most of them anyway. For the other 2/3, the majority of them are asking to work part-time. Now, actually, in this country, we have a really high proportion of women working part-time compared to the rest of Europe, which you wouldn't think we did, but we do. There are lots and lots of women working part-time. The problem with part-time work is that it's paid £5 less per hour than full-time work, and you only have a 21% chance of being promoted if you work part-time, whereas if you work full-time, you have a 48% chance of being promoted. So once you're in part-time work, you're on what's sometimes affectionately called the mummy track, which is you're working in a job that is below your skill level, below your pay level, and your career completely stagnates. You haven't got much chance of being promoted, and you're being totally underpaid for what you do. And that's a massive problem. Now, the reason why this doesn't work, why part-time work doesn't really work in the UK, is because we're obsessed with presenteeism, absolutely obsessed with it. We were named crowned in 2009 the unpaid overtime capital of Europe. I mean, what an accolade. And presenteeism has, there's been loads of research from CIPD that's shown that the number of people that witness presenteeism in their organisation over the last 10 years has gone from something like 5% to something like 87%. It's just everywhere. People are working 10 hours of unpaid overtime per week on average. And mothers cannot compete in that environment. It's impossible. You've got to leave to go and get your child. You can't just leave your child on the doorstep of nursery with a packet of beef flavoured hula hoops and hope they're all right, can you? You've got to leave your job and go and get your kid. So the solution to me isn't sort of flexible working and saying, yeah, give women more part-time work. The solution to me is tackling presenteeism. And until we can tackle presenteeism, then we won't see women really succeeding in their careers. And I think we do that by there's a variety of methods that have been tested: 4-day working weeks, 6-hour working days. They've been tested in different countries and in different organizations. The PepsiCo CEO, Robert, I've forgotten his surname, he realizes presenteeism is a massive issue. He says to his employees, I want you to be a hero in the workplace and a hero at home, because he's American and they like to say things like that. And he tackles presenteeism by telling his managers and executives to leave loudly. So leave the office on time and really loudly. Don't try and sneak out of the back door, which is what lots of us do because we're embarrassed that we're leaving on time. Make it really clear to all of the staff that it's okay, you can leave on time, that's fine, we're happy, we want you to go home, we don't want you to sit feel that you have to sit at your desk for no reason. When we know you're not really working, you're just messing around on Facebook. So there are examples of people trying to tackle this culture of presenteeism, and to me that's what we've got to do and focus on.
Okay, we're going to turn to the Q&A now, and I've just spotted there is a question about presenteeism, so I'm going to pick that one first and then we'll move to some of the, but do you think that presenteeism has changed in the time of remote working? This is from Chris.
Yeah, it's an interesting question. I do think the fact that more people are home working, you know, half of employees are now working from home, whereas it was like 5% of employees before the pandemic. This rapid shift to home working is a good thing in lots of ways, because it will reduce presenteeism. You know, you're not going to sit at your desk and pretend you're working when nobody's watching. I mean, that would be ridiculous. So in that sense, it does tackle presenteeism. There are many problems though with working from home. It's not like a silver bullet to all of the issues. You know, the problems, some people aren't safe at home. You know, we've got to think about that. There are many people that don't feel safe at home. And there's also the issue of people that have just started in their careers unable to network, and networking is part of what helps you progress in your career. So you miss out on the networking that can be so valuable to developing your career. I think a lot of managers struggle with home working and how they monitor what you're doing, but that it's a good thing they've had to let go of that kind of wanting to, you know, oversee and monitor everything that all of your work. So yeah, there are pros and cons to home working, but I definitely think on the whole it's a good thing.
Yeah, I mean, I know myself, I've struggled to switch. I always used the commute as the switching from home to work in my head, as that was how I shifted from home mode to work mode, was by cycling to work. But now now I don't get to do that. I find it really difficult to sort of shift out of mum mode into work mode, and it can be quite difficult.
And you can actually, like when I first went freelance, I realised I was losing my mind after about 3 months of working from home, and it just slowly crept up on me, because it's very rare that you, like, you know, some days I realise I haven't been outside. Some days I wear my pyjamas all day, Jo. You've got to get dressed. That's a key thing if you're working from home. There's lots of talk at the minute about blended working, so people working some days from home and going into the office some days, and this has been like, you know, all big organizations that I've talked about are like, yeah, we're going to go for blended working. And yes, again, there's positives, but there's also negatives in that what will happen is all of their, I hate to say it, white men will go into the office and they'll be round the table making the decisions. People that don't find it as easy to go into the office, if they have the option of working from home, will work from home. So mothers, disabled people, other people that have other types of caring responsibilities will be more likely to work from home. So they will be part of those discussions that will perhaps be making big decisions. And so all of that needs kind of thinking through and talking about a lot more, I think.
Yeah. Nadia, could we have a question from the chat box, or have you had any raised questions, Nadia?
Yeah, of course. Yeah, thank you for asking. So we've got the first one here. What are you most proud of since starting Pregnant Then Screwed?
It's hard to boil it down to one thing. I mean, I'm really proud of March of the Mummies, which we did in 2017. It's the bravest thing I've ever done. And at the time, I wasn't earning any money from Pregnant Then Screwed, and so I had no cash, and just decided that we weren't making enough noise and we had to do something that would really amplify our messages. And so decided to do these 6 protest marches across the country on the same day at the same time. And we were all March of the Mummies because it was Halloween when we did it, but also, you know, we've got everybody dressed up as the Walking Dead, which worked quite well for mothers because we're all knackered all the time. But it could have gone horribly, horribly wrong. I just thought, right, let's go for it, let's do it, let's see how it goes. And I had nightmares for about a month before it, that I would turn up, it would be raining, and there'd be 3 people there, all, you know, in a Father Ted style, going, down with that sort of thing. But actually there was about 2,000 people did it across the country. It was raised in Prime Minister's questions the following day. There were 12 MPs that turned up to the protest march themselves. It got international coverage. So the bravery paid off. So I'm proud of that, because it took a lot of guts, and it worked. But I'm extremely proud of what we've managed to do during COVID-19, and I know that we've really made a difference to lots of people's lives through some of the things we've managed to change and the support we've given to women.
Thank you. We've got a couple of questions in the chat function, a lot of interest in what people can actually do to help. How can we as individuals change the presenteeism culture? Are there any simple steps? I think Katie was asking whether there were any simple steps beyond writing to your MP. I think that one's been noted, but about the debate that they can do and take to support your organisation and its work. And then one from Vic about how do we leave loudly whilst working at home? Like the term, but how do we actually do it?
Well, you don't need to leave loudly if you're working at home, because the leave loudly is to try and tell other people that are in the office that they don't have to stay there for no reason, that they can go home, that it's fine to go home, that we're happy for you to leave on time. So you don't need to do it if you're at home. I mean, I'm really interested in the 4-day working week. I'm really interested in it. I think there's challenges with the 4-day working week, but I think it's a really interesting proposition. And of course, the Labour Party have been very interested in it and have done lots of reports and research into it. There's a great guy called Alex Soo-Jong Ping, who's written a book about it, and he did studies across the world on companies that are doing 4-day working weeks and the benefits of it. And then there's other options like a 6-hour working day. You know, the Pursuit Marketing, which is based in Glasgow, they employ, I think, about 170 staff, and they moved everybody to a 6-hour working day, and they saw their productivity massively increase and their income massively increase as a result. So they didn't reduce anybody's salary. They just said, right now, you're going to work 6 hours instead of working, you know, some of them were working 10, 12 hours. You've got to get your work done in that time, and we're going to close the office after 6 hours, so you can't be in here. And it made an enormous difference to their productivity, the well-being of their staff, the retention, staff retention, all of that stuff. So there's lots of different methods that you can try. I think Leave Loudly is just a really simple one that all CEOs should implement if you're in an office. Don't bother doing it at home because nobody's listening.
Okay, so we've got one here from Katie, and also there was an advanced question that was very similar, so I'm going to ask it. It's Katie can work flexibly, but her husband can't, and has an office obsessed with presenteeism. Similar, the advanced question was that this particular individual had awesome feminists that she worked for, and her work was really responsive and family friendly. The problem was that she is allowed to flex and reduce her hours by extra holiday for the school holidays and all of that. But as a result, it's always her that has to flex, and really hard for her husband to support her career, and hard for her to agree to move to more responsibility without knowing that she can let go of family management. How do we encourage male-dominated workplaces to become more family friendly? You know, there is this issue of presenteeism in male-dominated offices, and how do we get them to step up?
Yeah, I mean, it's not just an attitude of presenteeism. If any dads ask for flexible working, they're much more likely to be rejected. If they go and say they want shared parental leave, I've written all about this in my book, and some of the quotes are eye-watering. Some of the things that employers have said to dads just because they want to care for their own offspring. There is an unbelievable amount of sexism and a deeply entrenched cultural bias towards how that situation should work, which we're constantly fighting against. And I think most modern day dads get it, that they want to spend, you know, all the research shows they want to spend time with their children. They really want to be a good dad. but they're fighting against this culture constantly. And of course, the problem is that CEOs and boardrooms are full of older men who this just wasn't a thing for them. They didn't have to think about it. And so they were the perfect unencumbered worker. And so so you're facing, it's like an old generation and a new generation fighting against each other. So eventually I think things will right themselves and we will get some sort of equality. But in the meantime, in order to speed that process up, what we need is properly paid, ring-fenced paternity leave. That's how we solve it. And we've just seen that yesterday France announced that they've doubled their paid paternity leave. So they're having the same economic issues that we have, although not quite as bad, but they've just doubled their paid paternity leave. Iceland are looking at giving dads 6 months ring-fenced paid paternity leave and mothers 6 months ring-fenced paid paternity leave. So they're also increasing their paternity leave. All the countries that have done this have shown that if you ring fence it, you say, this is yours, dad, you can't give it to anybody else, and you pay it properly, dads take time out of the workplace in their droves, and that has a massive impact on the way employers treat fathers and mothers. It has a massive impact on the amount of caring work the dad does throughout his life, as well as the balance of work in the home. So the more time dads take out to care for their children, the better women do in their careers. So the only way we're going to get equality in the workplace is if we have equality in the home. And the only way we're going to get that is by properly paid ring-fenced paternity leave.
Thank you. I'd like to come back to this topic of the mummy career path. I think there was a question in the chat box about it, but it is essentially that women get stuck in these part-time roles and unable to move on. What are your thoughts on solutions for that one? I know this is something that I myself have experienced and also faced discrimination at interview when wanting to move on and finding the right time to talk about whether or not whether you can work flexibly or part-time and what flexibility can be offered, even when organisations have advertised flexibility, they're not then prepared to actually deliver on that promise. Have you any thoughts on that challenge?
Yeah. So we've been campaigning for a while, and something that we think is achievable under this government, but it's not necessarily what I would go for under a different government, but something we do think which is achievable. We want all employers to have a legal obligation to advertise jobs as flexible and to state what type of flexibility they can offer. And then once they employ somebody, they have a legal obligation to offer that type of flexible working. So as you were saying, sometimes they go, yeah, we're open to flexible working. And then you go for the interview and go, right, well, I want to work part-time. And they're like, well, we don't do that. So to get over that challenge. And actually that campaign has done really well, because Helen Watley, the MP, I can never say her surname, the MP, she's now a minister, the one that gets rolled out to talk about all the stuff the government's doing wrong. She, before she was a minister, was really interested in flexible working. So she presented a 10-minute rule bill in Parliament on this on our behalf. And it did really well and was then made it into the Conservative Party manifesto and was part of the Queen's speech as well. So the government have committed to doing something on flexible working. What they'll do, who knows, because everything's gone on hold because of COVID-19, and we now all wait with anticipation as to whether they go down a deregulation route, which is the worst route they can go down, or whether they start to implement these kinds of policies that will really make a difference to women. So that's what we want to see from a legislative level. From an individual level, if you're working part-time, I think I've seen lots of great successes from job shares, because then the employer is getting a full-time person effectively, and your productivity massively goes up again. If there's loads of research into that, if you work as a job share, but it's quite hard to do. It's quite hard to find somebody that you can work with. It's quite hard to find a job that it works with. We need more. at the minute, only 14% of jobs above a salary of £20,000 are advertised as flexible. And that's the problem. There's no, you're stuck because there's nowhere to go if you need flexible working. So we need more employers to be advertising flexible working and good jobs that are flexible.
Yeah, and I think that's something that we might start to see as a result of this pandemic. I mean, certainly flexibility in terms of the location, but perhaps not so much flexibility in terms of the hours. I'm going to ask for another question from Nadia. There's been lots of really interesting discussion in the chat. So thanks everybody for your contributions. And I've noticed a good chat about the leave loudly, and a lot of people still feeling like that you can and should still leave loudly whilst working remotely, using things like your out of office, your email, and if you've got WhatsApp channels, just sort of making clear to other staff that you're not working now, and that you're done for the day, and a big bye-bye. So that was quite good. Have we got another question, Nadia?
We have got lots of questions and lots of support in the chat room as well. It's really, really great to see. Let's say I'm going to combine a couple. So we're creating we're writing a hybrid working policy at the moment. What would be your advice to ensure we create a better balance between those with and without caring responsibilities? And I think also, and I'll combine that slightly with another question, would be leading that kind of organization as well, or leading that function. What qualities would you say, kind of emotional intelligence or leadership qualities, are really important to bring in here and to role model as well?
I'll take the second question first, because the first question is a difficult one. I mean, emotional intelligence, I did the Clore leadership course, so I know how important emotional intelligence is. And I think there is a massive problem with very patriarchal leadership in organisations where you're expected not to show your emotions. And actually, we know that vulnerability and emotion has massively positive impact on you as a manager, as well as your ability to lead an organisation. I think be as emotional and as human as you possibly can be. I think the reason why Pregnant Then Screwed has been so successful is because we're not a faceless institution where people feel really connected to us and like they know us. And I'm very open about my experience and my vulnerabilities and mental health and challenges of looking after children, as well as talking about the issues that we try and promote. And that means that people just feel really connected to us, and that's what differentiates us, I think, from lots of other charities. So that was quite a waffly answer, but I think as women we're told to not show our emotions, aren't we, a lot, and it's makes no sense to me at all. Policies around, I mean, it's kind of too big, and I'm probably not the right person to answer that. We run an organisation called Gendering Change. It's our sister organisation, where it's a group of brilliant people that work within organisations that help them make their workplaces the best they can be for working parents. And they're really skilled on all of this stuff, like what policies you need to implement, how you implement them, what changes you can make in your organisation that really work for working parents. I don't do that. I don't go into organisations and deliver that. And so I think, you need to look at what sort of organisational setup you've got at the minute, and what the challenges. It's very specific and nuanced, I think, for each organisation. So I'm afraid I'm going to have to pass on that one.
Well, we're actually getting close to needing to wrap up now anyway, but I'm going to ask you one question to finish, which is, if you could share one piece of advice with other mothers from your own journey, what would it be?
Something's just flashed into my head. I shouldn't say. I'm going to say it. And I once, this is a really embarrassing story, I was driving with my kids to a friend's house and we got stuck in a traffic jam. And when you've got 2 kids in the back of the car, you can't get out of the car, can you, to go to the toilet? And I was desperate to go for a wee, absolutely desperate. And so we were stuck and it just wasn't moving at all. So I thought I could use a nappy and that would keep everything, you know, I'd be fine. I could just use the nappy and then I wouldn't have to get out of the car. And honestly, don't ever think that's a good idea. It doesn't work. I was just a hot, wet mess by the time I arrived at my friend's house. So that would be one bit of advice. Next bit of advice. I mean, I think the key thing to making it all work, having kids and having a career that you're happy with and you feel like you're achieving your own goals. And this sounds really anti-feminist of me to say, but it's all about your relationship. It's all about being with somebody that wants that for you and that they are willing to do some of that crappy stuff at home that's unpaid and unvalued. And if you're with somebody that is willing to lift you up and go, yeah, you go on and do that and I will go and clean the bog, then you're onto a winner. And if you don't have that, but you have a relationship with somebody where you can talk to them, then there are methods and things that you can try that can try and switch that balance, because sometimes the men don't get it. There's a great app called My Home, which gamifies domestic labour. So it works perfectly for my partner because he's so competitive. So you make it into points so that's a good tip. Try that. And if you're on your own, I mean, this is why the whole structure and system needs to change, because single parents, the structure just really doesn't work. You know, you need somebody else in order to work within the systems that we have created. So, yeah.
Well, thank you very much, Joeli. It's been really lovely to get to know you and your organisation a bit better. Thank you, everybody in the audience, for participating and for such great questions. Please do mention that the conversation can be continued on Clore Social's Twitter. And if you want to share any additional thoughts, then you can do that now. Nadia or Yulia, would you like to close by saying when the next Leaders Now event is, or do we not have the details of that yet?
Hello there. Sorry, I was a bit late to respond. Hi, thank you for that. Yeah, we'll be sending out details to everyone who's attended this event and all our newsletter subscribers within it should be actually this week. So we've just had that confirmed, which is wonderful news. So we'll be sending it out. So please subscribe also to our newsletter if you want to hear about that. Follow us on Twitter and we'll be sure to share the details. Thank you so much.
So that's follow up on Twitter, sign up to the newsletter, and write to your MP about the debate next month, amongst other things. And also remember that top tip about nappies. Okay, thanks very much, everybody. I'm going to close it now. Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thank you.